This morning I'm going to take a stab at filming something I've been thinking about for a while. One of the things that I'm good at is finding connections between disparate pieces of information, finding patterns, signals in the noise. And one of the things I want to offer as value is to try and link those things together and explain them in a way that's more accessible. So I want to touch on an idea that I've heard from a variety of places and expand on it with some evidence that I've seen and offer you my conclusion. One of the things that we have to deal with as a society is that if you have a male-dominated tyranny, for lack of a better term, a patriarchal tyranny, then what you have is a very steep hierarchy where it looks kind of like a king. You have a situation where a big, strong, powerful man gathers power to himself and directly applies that power out over society, owns everything, has all the women, has all the children, has the prerogative to break all the laws, to make new laws, to kill whoever he wants to kill. It is it's a male power fantasy, you might say, to be king. You might imagine yourself a benevolent dictator, but that's not how it typically works out in history. And history is replete with examples of male-dominated tyranny. Happens all the time. I think one of the things that's interesting about the society we live in today is that we've managed to create something that's, if not unique, at least very rare. We have a nascent matriarchal tyranny. This is not necessarily a new idea, and I'm not laying claim to that. This is what I've heard and how I'm explaining it because I think we can apply it and it can be useful to consider. A female-dominated tyranny. Well, if a woman has a conflict with another woman, or even with another man for that instance, she tends to express or try and resolve that conflict or express her aggression through indirect means. In other words, you're going to look at bullying, gossiping, backbiting, reputation destruction. That's typically how a woman expresses aggression. We're speaking generally, statistically. A man, when he wants to be aggressive, is going to just punch you in the face. But more direct, more visible. But it tends to be more effective. But because female aggression tends to be more indirect, it's less effective, but it's also tougher to spot. You really have to kind of dig around and find it. And so it can fly under the radar for a while. That's the purpose of indirect aggression. Now, I think one of the reasons why we have this is because what we've talked about before with the progressive movement in America. The idea that instead of having an overnight revolution, we are going to progressively move towards a communist utopia. We're going to take step by step by step and take indirect actions to constrain liberty, to corral the American government system, to erode the checks and balances built into the constitutional power framework. And so that tends to reinforce culturally this idea of indirect aggression becomes the dominant way of putting out aggression, putting out. We have in America, this is my thesis, a rising matriarchal tyranny. So if male-dominated tyranny is a very steep hierarchy with a king at the top and maybe a cadre of elite advisors that basically get to just run the show and everyone else is chattel. You might say the other side is a radical flattening of society and power structures. In other words, equality of outcome, which is another thing that I think leans towards this. So in equality of outcome, this is the instinct of a female caregiver. If she has 3 children and she has 3 cookies, she's going to give 1 cookie to each child. That's equality of outcome. If she has 5 cookies, and my wife and I have done this. We had a situation the other day where we were given some game tokens at an arcade, and they gave us an uneven amount. We gave an even amount to each of the kids, and we just held back the surplus because we didn't want that perceived unfairness among the children. We wanted the children to have an equality of outcome. So, I'm not saying equality of outcome is a bad thing or it's unprecedented. It just is. If you want a radical flattening of society, a disruption of the current hierarchies as morally wrong, and a creation of as flat of a society as you can, one of the ways you can accomplish that, and one of the ways this gets twisted up and turns into a tyranny, is the idea that if you take the core motivations of a female caregiver, this is speaking of traditional gender roles, not assigning universal attributes to everyone in a caregiver role or everyone who's a woman. This is a generalized discussion of the statistical likelihood of behavior, the center of the bell curve. So, a female caregiver, particularly of an infant, take it to its extreme. A female caregiver of an infant sometimes has to go into mama bear mode, you might have heard. That mama bear mode, that heightened emotional state, is where you have a woman will boil the entire world down to infant, caregiver, and threat. Infant, whatever it is that is a victim nearby you, your infant, the thing you're caring for, the thing you're trying to raise up, the thing you're trying to protect. Caregiver, yourself or someone who is ideologically aligned with you, who agrees with you that the infant must be cared for. And threat is everybody else. You end up with a situation where in a society that is being dominated by this kind of mindset, either you are actively trying to combat threats, typically through government power, because that's an indirect method. An indirect method appeals to the female mindset. Or you show compliance and ideological alignment with the caretakers. You show a willingness to submit to those who are acting as caretakers. Then they don't see you as a threat. It's your way of signaling to them, I'm with you. I'm helping to take care of your infant. Don't fight me, go fight the threats. Even if you're not actually aligned, it's enough just to signal. So you either need to, you see that, particularly in social media, that desire for enforcing compliance. Now, or you're an infant, you're a victim. You become a protected class if you can play the victim, because you transplant yourself in your situation and you fill the role in the brain of the culture that's looking for an infant to protect. And you say, here I am, I'm a victim. Now the caregiver has someone to protect. They have a righteous moral cause. It is good for a mother to protect her infant. It's good for her to take risks. It's even good for her to violate freedoms and cultural norms in an effort to protect her infant. The mama bear mode. If you create a society where you have to be in one of those three roles, you're going to get a matriarchal tyranny. If that's all that's allowed. There's no ideological diversity that's allowed. There's no intellectual agreement that's accepted, because a mama bear doesn't care about philosophy. She cares about the safety and well-being of the infant she's protecting. She doesn't want to have a rational, philosophical, or theological conversation about the long-term, broad-reaching impact of the decisions that we're making in this moment. She's in protect my infant mode. I'm speaking generally. If you have a society that gets pushed to an extreme where they are supporting this kind of simplistic, I'll give you an example. I think it was Ben Shapiro, but a right-leaning speaker goes onto a campus several years ago. And there's video of this. I'll try and find a link. There's video of this where he starts speaking. It's in a small lecture hall. There's maybe 300 people in the room. And there are some protesters there that line up in front. And as soon as he starts speaking, giving a basic vanilla right-wing liberty blah 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 speech to a group of willing participants. In other words, if the protesters aren't there, we have a free exchange of ideas. And then everyone goes home. But the protesters come in, they don't tear the place down, they don't throw stuff, they don't even heckle. Instead, in a really well-disciplined way, they start chanting shame over and over and over again. They're trying to disrupt the talk in an indirect way by applying a negative moral label to the speaker's ideas and actions, saying he should be ashamed of himself. His ideas are shameful, and a moral person, when they are accused of something that is shameful, they're going to stop. They're going to reevaluate. They're going to think about what they're doing. Wait, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing something shameful? I don't want to do something shameful. I want to be virtuous. So they're undercutting the moral authority of the speaker, and they're undermining his thought process. And then the speaker turns his attention and doesn't attack, doesn't heckle, but he engages with them at a rational level. And he says, let's have a conversation about your objections. You now have the heckler's veto. You've stopped the talk. Let me deal with you. As soon as he starts addressing the protesters, they stop chanting shame and instead chant safety. Now they're claiming the victim. So first, they were the mama bear. They're applying an indirect social pressure to try and stop a behavior they don't like, to protect to protect whatever. And then as soon as they are engaged with, they go into victim mode and they say, I'm the helpless infant. Safety, safety, protect me, safety, safety. And as soon as he stopped engaging with them and began to resume his speech, they went back to shame. This cycle happened 3 or 4 times. Shame and safety, shame and safety. In other words, this is one of the clearest examples I've found of this kind of matriarchal tyranny phenomena. They're not throwing water bottles. They're not trying to harm him. They're not trying to express physical aggression. They're not challenging the merit of his ideas. They're not debating him. They are signaling through indirect social pressure a moral accusation that he is a shameful being. And the moment he engages with them, they take on the role of the victim, because they know that if they're a victim, they will be defended, and it makes the other guy the oppressor. And you can't be an oppressor. Shame and safety suppresses speech, suppresses freedom, suppresses thought. It's terribly disruptive. It's evil. One last thing as a conclusion, I think this is where Trump derangement syndrome comes from. That's a term tossed around in certain circles that basically said, boy, once President Trump became president, it seems to have broken the brain of several different people in society. In other words, somehow President Trump, in his embodiment of a person, caused a whole swath of the commentary and the regular public to lose their minds. They saw everything he did as evil. They saw him as an evil person. They saw everything that he did as morally repugnant. They would not accept even good stuff that he did as good. And they're still obsessed with him. Again, tiki torches and pitchforks. It's been 8 years, 7 years since that tiki torch march, and we're still going back to that well. I think it's because if you accept the framework of caregiver, infant, threat, you must have compliance. If someone is not a victim, then either they're a threat or they are a fellow caretaker. And if they will not signal compliance to you, then they're not a caretaker. So they're a threat. And instead of destroying that threat, he becomes president. That breaks your brain, because your brain says the world must fit into these 3 categories. He does not fit into these 3 categories, and he's proven our ineffectiveness at dealing with him as a threat. Therefore, emergency, panic mode, and the brain explodes and you get Trump derangement syndrome. That's my theory on thinking about this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Good luck out there. Have a wonderful day.